on Monday, it came out that Trae Young will probably be exiting the Hawks, whether that is at the February 5th trade deadline or it's just a matter of them letting him walk because they did not reach a contract extension last summer. It does seem like these two are about to part ways. We saw that come down from ESPN's Tim McMahon. I believe we also saw it from Chris Haynes. It sounds like Atlanta is ready to move on from Trae Young if they could find a suitor. Now the question is, can they find that suitor? And I've looked a lot into potential Trae Young trades. I think that the easiest one you could possibly make, and I tweeted this yesterday on Twitter at BettingOnX is my Twitter account. I think that the most logical and easiest move is just a straight 1-for-1 swap with the Sacramento Kings of Domantas Sabonis to Atlanta, Trae Young to Sacramento. The reason that I like that is I think that the Hawks are actually a little bit light at the center position. I do like Onyeka Okongwu a lot. I've praised him a ton. I was really high on him coming out of the draft. I do some draft stuff for Real GM, so I do a lot of draft prospect breakdowns and was really high on Okongwu coming out of USC. And I think he's been a really good pro since he's come into the league. It's just he is a little undersized, and I think that when you have so many defensive weaknesses or just liabilities in your starting five, it's hard to be undersized at the center position, especially when you're also undersized at the power forward position. And I just think that, this Hawks team could use a little bit more size, and bringing Sabonis in a Young trade actually makes a lot of sense because Sabonis not only has size, but he can also be a playmaking hub for them. I mean, this is a guy that has run a ton of offense for the Kings throughout his career. And if you lose Trae Young's ball handling and passing ability, you need to make up for it with just all of your rotation players. And while Jalen Johnson has done a really good job of handling the rock this year, Nickeil Alexander-Walker is a solid lead guard. I think you need a little bit more playmaking. Sabonis can give you that. He also gives you kind of a bruising score around the paint. So I think it makes sense for the Hawks a little bit. And then on the other side, Sacramento is desperate for a starting point guard ever since they moved Tyrese Halliburton in the trade for Sabonis that I thought was crazy at the time. And then they lose De'Aaron Fox, who wanted to go to San Antonio, wanted out of Sacramento. You ended up, losing 2 point guards after being in a situation where you once had Fox and Halliburton. Now you're desperate for one. Well, how about Trae Young? He's 27 years old. I still believe he's a really good player. I know that he has his defensive issues, and he's a player that can be a little bit hard to fit into an offense. But you know what? Sacramento really doesn't have much of an offensive scheme. They are a team that just desperately needs point guard talent and talent overall. But bring Trae in. Maybe he gives you an identity on offense, and obviously the defense around him becomes a problem, but figure that out later after you bring in a really good player. You don't have any right now. So I think this makes a lot of sense for Sacramento. Other teams that I think that makes sense for Trae Young are the Toronto Raptors and the Minnesota Timberwolves. I said Dallas Mavericks because I do believe the only way that you could probably get Trae Young to Minnesota is maybe in like a 3-way trade where Anthony Davis goes to the Hawks, which is a hot rumor, and I'll talk about that in a second, and maybe Julius Randle and other pieces go to the Mavericks. I don't think Dallas wants Trae Young. Tim McMahon said that himself. He said that they are very interested in moving Young specifically to the Hawks for some of their assets. I believe it would be Risa Shea and picks, but they do not want Trae Young back in that trade. So I don't think that there's a scenario where Trae Young goes out and Anthony Davis comes in and it's a 2-way trade between the Hawks and Mavericks. I think you need a third trade and a third team, and maybe it's Minnesota who also needs point guard help, and maybe they can find a way to make Trae Young work, because if they don't give up, all of their defensive pieces in that deal, if it's Julius Randle, some of the young guys and a pick or something, they keep, Jaden McDaniels, Rudy Gobert, Anthony Edwards, and they have a really strong defensive infrastructure around Trae Young. And maybe just getting him to a situation where you're on a winning team again convinces him to just defend at a little bit higher level, or at least with more effort. But I do think that the Timberwolves are a team that makes sense. I think that the Raptors are also a team that makes sense. I do think that Young would be an upgrade over Emmanuel Quickley, and I do think that the Hawks would probably be interested in some type of Quickley swap where you find the salaries that work and maybe another piece goes to Atlanta. But I do think that makes sense for Toronto, because I think Toronto can use another infusion of talent. I know that team probably is most needy at the center spot right now, but I do think that the Raptors would be interested in a point guard upgrade. I like Quickley. I think he's a solid player, but you don't let him prevent you from getting Young. So those are the 3 teams that I think would be interested in making the move for Young. It would be the Kings, the Timberwolves, and the Raptors. But I would also say that there is the option that you can't move Trae Young. You're stuck this season and you want to get better, and you still go out and make the move for Anthony Davis. You keep Trae Young, you move Zachary Risachet and Kristaps Porzingis in a first-round pick, not that Pelicans first-round pick that is really valuable for next year, maybe a top 10 protected first-round pick down the road for Anthony Davis. But I think that that's a really interesting trade with this current Hawks team, because I think that whereas Okongwu is not capable of being the defensive anchor that this team needs behind Trae Young, who is a sieve defensively, I think you bring in Anthony Davis. He can adequately anchor your defense. And I think that all of a sudden your starting five is, Trae Young, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Dyson Daniels, Jalen Johnson, Anthony Davis. You have three very good defenders in that lineup with Alexander Walker, Daniels, and Anthony Davis. Johnson should be a better defender than he is. He's been just as bad as Young defensively, and no one really talks about it because of how good he's been offensively, but he has been a big problem for them defensively. But I do think with Anthony Davis next to him, he could be a little bit better, just kind of playing a roamer role. But overall, you have 3+ level defenders in that starting five. You're still dangerous on offense, and your bench is still pretty good. I mean, you still have Onyeka Okongwu now moved to the 6-man role. I think he'd be great in that role. You have Vit Krejci, you have Asa Newell, you have Luke Kennard. You still go 4 deep and maybe 3 deep with guys that can contribute in the playoffs, but one of the best starting fives in the league if you get Davis and you just move Risachet and Porzingis. And if you're the Mavericks, the flip side is that, you bring in Risachet, a player that should have never been picked number 1. Like, that was something that I strongly believed when I was covering that draft for Real GM. Like, Risachet never looked like a number 1 pick to me. I don't understand what the Hawks were doing. Even if, Alex Sarr did not want to work out for you, which he didn't, you take him anyway, like the Jazz did with Ace Bailey last year, or you take someone else like Steph Castle or even Donovan Clingan would have made sense as a rim protector and pick and roll through, partner with Trae Young. That was actually who I thought they should have taken in that draft. I know it would have been a little bit of a reach at 1, but I loved Clingan's fit with Atlanta. And this is just a weird situation now where you have Risachet being, expected to play like a number 1 pick, even though he was never going to do that. He is a 3-and-D starter. Maybe he ends up being a really good one day, but as of right now, he's just a 3-and-D player. He's not that good at either, but he's just a serviceable rotation piece. And I think that, it makes sense for a team like Dallas to add that type of player to a core now that includes Cooper Flagg. And then Porzingis is a player that you've had before. He probably doesn't want to be in Dallas, but he's an expiring contract. You let him walk, then you become a cap space team in the offseason. You pick up a first-round pick. All of a sudden, you have a little bit of flexibility to build around, the next phase of your team, which seemingly they want to be Kyrie Irving and Cooper Flagg. And then, you bring in Risachet as another starter. You have Max Christie. You have a couple of interesting kind of off-ball defensive, 3-and-D type pieces, and bring in, some cap space, go out and, add a free agent, a big free agent. I think it makes sense for both teams, but yeah, this situation feels like it's nearing its end. And I'm a Trae Young fan. I wanted to see it work with this Hawks team this year. I have a future on Atlanta at 110-1 to win the East that I thought was a great value when all the moves started to be made in the offseason, because the Hawks had a good offseason, brought in a lot of talent, did not lose a lot of talent, but this fit has not been working. And I do think it's going to take either moving Young or adding another piece to Young to get this to work, because the current, rotation, it's just not working out very well. So that's what I have on the Trae Young situation.